Good morning, and welcome to Solid Ground, or welcome back, as those who know the show. So for first-timers, we'll come to your wonderful selves in a moment. For those who are in the know, drop me a line if you're on Family First Facebook page or YouTube channel. Your messages will come to me live. Say good morning, let me know that my sound is on. Let me know where you are around the country or around the world, just as Michael has done. Good morning to you. And with the magic of technology, I can throw it up here, which is great. So good morning to first-timers. Welcome to Solid Ground. This is one of many of actually Family First media platforms. It's half an hour with me, which may be a bit of a struggle for some, but it's half an hour of me sort of reflecting on things which are happening politically, culturally, socially around New Zealand and around the world. Suppose bringing that solid ground of good values, good ethics, good morals, good philosophy, if you will, to discussions. And know, as I say, this is live, coming from my home here in Auckland. I'm back in the country. So do know, I'm just going to push my screen up a little bit. There we go. Do know that if you go on to, as I say, Family First Facebook page, just like Nancy Margaret has done here from lovely Nelson, and Jacob here, fortunately telling me that I've got my sound right. But you can message me live during the show, obviously with your comments on the stories of the day, and I'll be doing what I can to actually respond to any questions you have. So do know that despite me talking around a whole array of topics, if there's something on your mind, fire me a message. Just saying hello to Rosie here in Taupo, not so sunny. A heads up, I'm likely driving through Taupo on Friday, I think. Unfortunately not stopping. It's a literal flying visit. This is great. We're actually going to be talking about wokeness, and can I just say this almost sums up the argument, awake but not woke, and actually that's a wonderful distinction because, as I say, we'll get into wokeness a bit later, but I've noticed the progressives, particularly on the left, are beginning to really react now. They don't like being called woke. They're making a big thing of it. It's just a way to shut down conversation, which, to be fair, at times it could be. Simply using a slogan, as any side can do on any topic, often is just an attempt to close off an argument with a simple, sweet set of words. But people like myself and others use woke as a way to quickly incorporate actually quite a complex set of ideas. Like if I was to sit down every 5 seconds and trying to explain the difference in intersectionality, cultural Marxism, identity politics, deconstructionism, decolonization. As you can see, it's already quite a word salad. So woke incorporates a lot of that, which is basically, if people go, what is woke? It's basically people who believe they are so morally superior, usually based on emotion, that their views of the world are correct, and that they have a heightened sense of social justice, hence they are awake or woke. They have such a sense of social justice, much higher than any of us individually or put together, that they alone can see all the inequities in the world and somehow think they also have all the solutions. So that's why we use the term woke, and it is used now in a derogatory sense. I have noticed, again, there's something in, I think, the Herald this morning, some sort of academic, trying to be neutral on the topic, but quickly showing, again, their cultural Marxist connections, because it's all about equities and inclusions, and we have to better, practice affirmative action programs and all this sort of stuff. But was trying to say, well, of course, woke came out of the black civil rights movement, which it did, actually. But what they seem to fail to understand is words and concepts evolve. And what they're trying to do is hark back to say, well, no, the word originally meant this, and therefore no one really should be disparaging it because it comes out of the black civil rights movement. No one's allowed to use the term, which I think is hilarious, because the notion of social justice actually particularly came out of Catholic social justice theory many, many years ago. And I'll just say this because I don't intend to get into a deep theological discussion, but Catholic social justice is completely different to modern social justice, which you've heard me say before is neither just nor social. It's not just because it's not based on any good ethical foundations. It's basically modern social justice is just based on who's the bigger victim, and it's neither social because it actually doesn't draw people together. If you look at what's happening just in New Zealand, guys, we're a very divided nation now in the name of social justice. And so again, it's anathema. So it's just a battle for words. And I think maybe that's one of the encouragements today is we need to always be very cautious in our words, but we also need to understand the words that we're using and why. Because as you'll know, the modern world just throws a lot of words around, and the left or the progressive wing of society is always very, very keen to control what words mean, what words you're allowed to say. Taking a controversial topic of the day, if you were to say that there's only two biological sexes, you're now to be labelled and abused as a transphobic person, which is rather odd because actually you're a scientific person and believe in rational reality. But you can see how the left, or the progressives rather, try to manipulate language, and they blend the notions of sex and gender. Again, here's just an irony for you. If you were around, not that I was, but if you were around in the 1950s and 60s, there was a big push to separate the notions of sex and gender. So we'd always understood for thousands of years that there were two sexes, and then all of a sudden some theorists, particularly feminists, were saying, no, there's gender as well. So there's the biological sex, but there's these gender roles and the way we express ourselves, and there's a multiplicity of those. So we separated out Western society did, separated out the two concepts. But in probably the last 10 years, we've seen more radical activists try to blend those now back together, that sex and gender are the same. The words have been used interchangeably, and just as you can change your gender role, you can be a man who's at home or you can be a man who's working. Now we're led to believe that you can just change your sex just as you can change your gender. So look, it's all a bit nuts. All a bit nuts. So anyway, Ben, good morning. Lovely to have you along. We have another one from Nelson. Blenheim is definitely not Nelson. No offence to Blenheimites or to those in Nelson. Two amazing places. Jacob nails it. Woke is going against moral truth. Yeah, well, I think one of the problems with wokeism today is it doesn't really have much of a, certainly moral foundation nor an ethical one. It's not completely unethical, but it's basically just based on grievance. And as we all know, who is the greater victim? And I'm always struck as I read various articles in New Zealand media, how they just make statements around who is a victim and who is not, who has been historically oppressed and so forth. And it's just, to me, quite arbitrary. Like, who gets to decide this? Who gets to decide who is the minority groups in vogue? This is the stupidity of the whole system. But this just comes off journalists or activists' lips. This is the victim group. This is the minority. And you go, well, again, who decided that? What's the basis for this? So again, very good insight there. Keith says, that's a very kind... So it's two sets of thoughts. Well, it's good to be back. So Keith's referencing, and of course, God reigns. That's true. Well, that's one of the, the moral foundations that we work from. And it's actually, a conference that I've been attending overseas actually starts a lot from that actually Judeo-Christian values are a really strong foundation for functioning society. And one of the reasons Western society has succeeded so well, and I might add, guys, one of the reasons why, let's use the term, shall we, woke progressive activists are attacking Christianity so strongly, or ignoring it when it suits, because of course we've had outrage for the last, year and a half around what's happening in Israel and Gaza, for example. But have you noticed, you possibly haven't noticed unless you follow alternative media, literally hundreds of Christians are being butchered by Islamists in particular in Syria at the moment, literally as we speak. And of course, as I referenced a couple of weeks ago, in the likes of the Congo, where 70 or so Christians were beheaded in a church. Very little to no reporting of that in mainstream media because it just doesn't count. So it's just absolutely terrible. Philippa, good morning to you. Rosie's making a point here, a political point around, I don't know if you've been following it, obviously Andrew Bailey had to resign as a minister, but the media's been beating him up for being away for 3 weeks, which to be fair isn't ideal, Rosie. I do accept it's not easy to have lost your ministerial role, but media never forget. Not that I've fortunately had that level of scandal, or scandal at all really. The media thought being pro-life was scandalous. I just thought it was actually a very appropriate and good ethical position. But yeah, disappearing for a few weeks after, it's not a good look, but Rosie's rightly pointing out that in the Labour Party, Carmel Sepuloni, the then deputy leader, disappeared to go on a reality TV show. So yeah, these are the absurdities, and this is one of the problems we're seeing in a lot of mainstream media at the moment. What they choose to report, what they don't report, as I say. Big focus on everything that happens in Gaza. And again, that's perfectly appropriate. But they're ignoring what's happening in Syria. As I say, Islamists are killing hundreds of Christians because they're Christians, let alone if we turn to Congo, to Nigeria, for example. And they're more than happy to be beating up politicians on the centre-right. But they're often very quick to ignore what's happening. And a great example here in New Zealand is, there's issues with the current coalition government. Obviously, someone like Andrew Bailey, not a good situation, not the worst of things, but not a great situation. But we're not hearing too much about the Manarewa Marae and what looks basically like rampant corrupt practices there. Very, very little reporting. So a bit of a concern, but again, why Family First is getting more into this media space, while I do Solid Ground. Bob is very busy now with Daybreak. That's a morning program on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Obviously we do our political panel on Thursday. Straight Talk last night. We're doing all we can to actually put in front of you different stories and perspectives. So hello to Catherine. That's lovely to have you there. So that is marvellous. Anyway, typical me, going off, blathering away. So look, a few things as I jump. Good news, which I think, so I'm always raging against all the problems, which is easy in this world, but I thought this was a really good news story coming out of Hungary. As you'll see there, they're putting in quite pro-child or pro-family policies. My screen's actually a little bit small for me, so I can't fully read the text, but and I can't remember it exactly, but you'll be able to read it, that basically they're saying there's going to be tax breaks for families that have one child, but if you're having more than that, you're not paying, I think, any income tax. So long and short, these are sort of the pro-family type policies which are needed. And look, it'd probably be too radical for New Zealand, but again, if you're old enough, you'll remember that we used to have, was it like a family benefit or a family tax credit? These things have now disappeared. So I just thought this was good news coming out of Hungary. I might add, actually, we heard when I was at this conference called ARC, along with Bob and Rachel, my wife, in London, from the former president of Hungary, who was talking around some of these dynamics. Again, the need to support the family, knowing that that's actually a foundation, a bedrock for society. But the second we heard from as a demographer, a person who studies demographics, who was saying, actually, around the world, we are seeing near catastrophic demographic decline. That just about every country around the world is not replacing its population. And he's ringing the alarm bells on this. He wasn't coming from a particularly moral front. This is, if you will, quite straight down the line, secular mathematical, if you will. He's just saying that, it doesn't matter if it's New Zealand, Australia, the UK, Taiwan, wherever. People are not actually having enough kids. It's as simple as that. Not having enough kids, meaning major population decline. We've never had that in the history of recorded humanity, and it comes with massive, massive consequences. Because actually, amongst many things, and we've seen it already here in New Zealand, there are far more old people, and by the way, it's not bad being old, but far more old people and fewer young people. And it's the younger people who are the economic base, who are there to try and support the older generation. So there's major, major issues there. And they're ringing the alarm bells. So I just thought, good on Hungary, good on Oban on this one. I don't agree with everything the man does, but actually it's very strongly pro-family, which I think is marvellous. And then speaking of family, I'd seen this on the BBC. So a report came out a few days ago about boys growing without their dads are in crisis. And look, it's good that there's a report on this. I'm going to put these little insights up about it because we all know it intuitively. I mean, it even came up in Parliament at times here in New Zealand when we were discussing a lot of the various social problems that we have. So, the number of people in prisons, for example, violence for family, drug use, suicides. One of the sad realities, which is not often confronted, is fatherlessness. And we rightly put a lot of focus on women and mothers. I think it's an amazing vocation. But fathers are important too. So I'm just going to leave you to read a couple of the... We don't have to. It's a free country. But this was some of what the report said. It also gives me a chance to have a sip from my mug. There we go. And also I have Bob texting, so I've got to check out what this is about. Aha! There we go. When the boss texts, you check it out. So as you can see, and what struck me out of this report was, as I thought the second one, boys are more likely to have a cell phone or a smartphone than have a father. And I thought that's a problem on two levels. Again, having a father is important. And I sat down with Katie Faust for a podcast a few months back. If you don't know Katie, she's amazing. She runs an American group called Them Before Us. And we were discussing around the likes of IVF and surrogacy and so forth, the deliberate choice now to not have fathers on top of actually fathers who run out on relationships and so forth. So look, it's a huge topic, guys. We could literally spend hours discussing it. But the basic point is that actually boys need their fathers. In fact, I think you can go broader than that. Families need fathers, and that's not throwing stones at families that don't have fathers. People get widowed. Some guys are just terrible. There's a lot of single mums out there. I mean, my wife effectively was a single mum before I met her. So, there's a whole lot of different dynamics, but we can also speak about the ideals. And at the end of the day, there is something that humanity has known for thousands of years, that the mum and the dad who create the child are also the best to raise and nurture them together. And this report, as I say, coming out of the United Kingdom, really just highlights the problems. And as you might expect, they then focused on this group called Lost Boys, who are basically mentoring, a bit like Project K that we have here in New Zealand, where actually boys in particular get mentored by men. And I just thought, it was important. And Catherine's got it right here. And you break down the traditional family, which has been a deliberate target, a lot of progressives over the years. It's one of the things they want to deconstruct. You do end up with a lot of the social problems that we see in society. Don't know the answer to this question. I think, though, there is a general decline in fertility rates, but I'm not 100% sure of that. I think, though, it's across both. The other factor I do know about, it was being discussed at ARC. So again, this was that big conference that Bob, myself and Rachel attended in London. A big part of it is, particularly in Western countries, people are choosing to have children later in life. Now, first and foremost, that's their choice. But this demographer was saying, look, a lot of people actually do. Men and women do want to have children, but they, in their 20s in particular, sort of that real sweet spot, for want of a better phrase, to have children where fertility is higher. People are putting it off for the sake of study and career, money, a lot of things which probably through our own families we can somewhat recognise. So people are delaying into their early, mid, sometimes late 30s. And particularly for women, fertility rates decline significantly there, and therefore either having children becomes impossible, difficult, or you only have one when in fact you wanted three. So there's a whole lot of Ben, I think if I read him rightly, where are the Christian? Look, that's a twofold thing. Firstly, good news. In fact, it's coming out on a podcast that I'll publish today or tomorrow. Talking to a group in Australia. It's called Collective Shout. They lobby, for want of a better word, against the objectification, sexualization of girls and women, and they have succeeded in the last 24 hours in having all of Andrew Tate's material on Spotify taken down. And I must admit, Ben, while I'm aware of Andrew Tate, I wasn't quite fully aware of what the man did, but as I understand it, and happy to be corrected by anyone, he'd done a whole series of programs, basically, of how men can dominate, abuse women. I mean, it just sounds absolutely appalling. It's not based on a consensual, loving, caring dynamic between two people. It's quite a power-driven dynamic. So just horrid. Anyway, they've succeeded in having all his stuff removed from Spotify, which I think is a great win. But I think the other side of what Ben's mentioned is true too. We've got a lot of these malign figures. You certainly see it through a lot of films as well now. We know the major issues around pornography, putting forward really terrible stereotypes. So we need to push against that. But I think we also need to have good role models and good examples. I think that's exceptionally important. Ed's nailed it too. I mean, if you're talking about demographic decline, when when society is killing thousands of babies here in New Zealand and millions in the likes of the state, you're going to have a problem. I mean, there's no one simple solution to this. It's not simply have more kids. It is around abortion. It's also around how we do foster care, adoption, and so forth. So lots to consider. But I just thought that was an interesting story there. More locally, you'll be noticing there's a lot of talk about NZME. So this is the company that owns the likes of the New Zealand Herald. There's a big shake-up coming. A guy called Jim Grennan, he originally Canadian but now lives in New Zealand. I mention that quite specifically because the media are raging against him and others, making him sound like a complete foreigner, which he's not. So he might have originally come from Canada, but he and his wife, I think, have lived here a long time now. But long and short, he's trying to wipe the board out and replace the existing board with, well, strange enough, new board members. They want the business to succeed more than it is, and already it looks like he's got the vote. So let's be clear, this man, Jim, I think has got about 9% of the shares, but clearly at least another 41% are saying they agree with him. But what's striking is twofold. One is the existing board, as you might expect, is raging against this and trying all that they can to sustain their jobs and pay. But the second is, I would say, and I'm sorry to use that term again, but I will just to provoke people, but you're seeing the woke reaction trying to effectively attack the character of anyone who might dare to be challenging how the Herald's operating in both a business sense, but also in its editorial policies. Because as many of us know here, and not everyone will agree, but actually the Herald, even though it's one of the more moderate of our legacy media, it's still highly compromised on a number of issues. As I said right at the start, you will not have read in the Herald about the butchering and murder of Christians in Africa and the lightest touch of coverage about what's happening in Syria at the moment, and then obsessive focus at times on what's happening with Israel, Gaza. I mean, those international examples, we can think of many more locally here in New Zealand. So it's pretty grim. So I'm actually quite excited that there are people prepared to invest into NZME. I think it's good that the board gets cleared out. I think they are not doing a good job either financially or editorially. And just one example of it, because it links to this podcast that, as I said, will drop in the next 12, 24 hours. I mean, this is, if I click, there's the right one. This is only just one example. I think actually Bob did a Mick blog on this recently. This is just one of the puff pieces the Herald runs promoting OnlyFans, which is basically just a pornography site. Now, again, this is a moral point from my side. I actually don't think pornography is a good thing. I don't think OnlyFans empowers women. I think it turns them into objects. And some, make a lot of money. Most don't. Most, as again this podcast will discuss. The one I'm sitting down with, her name is Melinda Tankard-Reist. Melinda Tankard-Reist from Collective Shout. And she points out just how abusive, derogatory obviously porn sites are, but OnlyFans and a number of the corrupt practices. But why I'm raising this is, when we talk about the likes of Jim Grennan and others taking over NZME, a big part of it's financial. They invest, they want their money. But the Herald is full of rubbish like this, and actually I would argue, as does Melinda, promoting the exploitation and sexualization of women, because this was only one of many pieces that was coming out. So as I say, get ready. This will be the podcast here. So with Melinda, we talk not about the Herald per se, but talking about what Collective Shout's doing. We talk about actually how a survey they've done recently in Australia of over 1,000 teachers has shown enormous amount of sexual harassment of female teachers and students by boys because they are being exposed to the likes of this rubbish promoted by the likes of our legacy media, which is why I'm actually happy to see the likes of Jim and others step in. Who knows if they will change the editorial side of things or not, but anything will be better than the rubbish we're being served up at the moment. And Rosie, I think, nails it. So it's sad. Sad. So I was just looking at some of the comments and then getting distracted. So yes, and thank you for all the comments. As people will know, I do read them all afterwards if I don't get to them all right. Now, speaking of what's happening in New Zealand, I think this just needs to be quickly called out. We are seeing far too many calls for violence, radicality, and aggression. So this is Rawiri Waititi is a Maori Party MP, and long and short, if you hadn't followed this particular story, posted on social media about cutting grass with a weed eater, which in itself is not a problem. The problem was that he went about saying, well, actually, he imagines every blade of grass being the ACT Party or David Seymour, and so cutting it down. I mean, that's just violent rhetoric there, and I think people need to be woke. I'm being a bit mischievous, need to be awake on this one and eyes wide open. The likes of him and his party members are radical and aggressive violence promoters. It's as simple as that. You don't go about threatening to cut people down like grass. You might remember with their big hikois, images of guns, patus, for example. Obviously had the haka in Parliament. Might be a mixture of views here, but it was threatening. It's just a series of repeats. So I'm not trying to hesitate here. I'm just trying to find the right words. Basically, we've been given a lot of hints about, again, their radical, violent, aggressive side, and it underpins a lot of their politics, I'm afraid. It's pretty much the give us what we want or else. And if that's the New Zealand you want, well, that's just not good. I can't think of any other way to say it. A New Zealand based on violence that the likes of the Maori Party, and to an extent the Greens, encourage. That's not democracy. It's not healthy. Maybe that's a return to the way things once were, as they were in this country, violent, tribal, divided. And in some ways that's now been mirrored in modern cultural Marxism, again, based on divided and ultimately violent societies. We've done better than that, and we need to maintain it. And we need to speak like we do in Solid Ground to, again, good values, good ethics. I was going to talk about what's happening in India, the trade deal, but I think that is boring at the moment. I like Ian's thought here. Ian, Bob will love this too. We're actually doing quite well. I don't have all the metrics in front of me, but to know that basically tens and tens of thousands of New Zealanders engage every week. In fact, I think we could probably collate it all, that we're now into the hundreds of thousands when we go across all the activities that we do. As we say, we obviously got the likes of Solid Ground, we've got Bob's shows, we've got Political Playback, we've got our podcast, Bob and I do Substacks, so we're actually getting some really, really good reach. I thought I'd just finish up, because I've just noticed the time and I've got to hit the road, is this last little story here, which just caught my eye. And look, I don't know this judge from a bar of soap, but you might remember there was an issue a few months ago where basically in a place called the Northern Club, it's an exclusive club I'm not a member. I've popped along a few times. One of the principles is you're meant to be respectful of whoever's in the club, period. You don't go up to people and just start talking to them, etc., etc. So, yeah, it's an old school club. But this judge, the lady on the left, or my left, it might be your right, I don't know how these screens mirror. But anyway, she was at an event. Winston Peters was there speaking to a group of people, and basically she barged on in and started having a crack at him, at Winston, around his views on tikanga and the law. Now look, she's a judge. She's welcome to have an opinion, but actually, regardless of the where, you don't just burst in. She claims she just got lost, which is fascinating, because even though the Northern Club's a big building, I'd expect the members to know it pretty well. But you don't, as a matter of courtesy, just burst into someone else's event, let alone, as I say, at the Northern Club, which has, if you will, protocols, tikanga, if you will, around this. But what struck me in the article is this judge is now claiming that didn't quite realise what was happening, didn't know it was Winston Peters. Look, you could say that of pretty much 119 other members of Parliament. You might not know who they are, but everyone knows who Winston Peters is. So she didn't recognise him, didn't recognise his voice, didn't realise it was a New Zealand First event, didn't realise she was in the wrong room. In fact, she didn't seem to realise much at all, other than she had an opinion, that she just had to speak to a group of people that she had no idea who they were. So you can hear the sarcasm in my voice, because the question for me is, how on earth do we have judges like this? And she might not understand it as she tries to fight this conduct inquiry, but her choices at the moment of how to defend herself do not put her or the judicial bench into particularly good light to demonstrate such ignorance matched with such arrogance. And what I mean by that is, again, how can you be so ignorant as to burst in to another group's event, but have the arrogance to feel that you should just start speaking to supposedly people you don't know? But we all know she knew exactly who they were, and she knew exactly what she wanted to say. Whether she was in complete control of her faculties is a whole other question, but that also raises judicial competency. So I'm pleased to see the conduct panel is going to look at her alleged behaviours. But yeah, how do we have people like this on the bench? I don't know. Last few little points. As I say, Bob and I do something called Substack. Bob writes prolifically. This is his latest one. I've only just got back into the country, as you know. I've been away, so my one on point. So you can go to substack.com. I'll be writing something this week. This was one of my last little pieces. As I say, I've got my podcast dropping in a day or two with Melinda. And as you may also know, I do a regular show on Reality Check. So I actually sat down, was it yesterday or the day before? I sat down with Ingrid Leary. She's a Labour MP. She's actually one of the few MPs prepared to come and talk. She's obviously on the other side of the political spectrum to me, but we had a really good chat, particularly around the polling. So lots there. As I say, there's other shows, lots of other shows that we do, guys. So the next one is going to be tomorrow morning, Daybreak. That's with Bob, where he has a short chat on the topics of the day. Thursday at 5 o'clock we have political playback. Tune in to that, and then of course on Monday nights we have Straight Talk. So guys, it's been lovely to have you all here as usual. It is nice to be back in the country. I must say, even though I thoroughly enjoyed Europe, it was cold, and because I was off in Ireland it was quite wet. So it is delightful as I sit here at home to look out to a mostly blue sky, and it's warm. I'm loving it. Guys, you have a wonderful rest of the week. I'll see you next Tuesday morning.